Today is March 26, 2024. Welcome to Native Calgarian. Oki, Naganago, Mekoche Chestokom Aki, or Dekot Nagot Tine Siku. My name is Red Thunder Woman. My married English name is Michelle Robinson, and I use she, her, they, them pronouns, but I identify as straight and cis. My Dene lineage roots me in the Great Bear Lake tribe in Treaty 11. My people wore rabbit skin, so it's been referred to as the land of the hair people. I'm a native to Turtle Island, and my Dene nation is uninvited to this area of Clincho Tine Indahe in Satu Dene, meaning many big dog town, named after the Calgary Stampede. I was born in Calgary, or in Blackfoot, Mohkinstsis, as Michelle Elliott, an English name that has afforded me privilege in an English colonial world. I'm going to say that again in the sense that people need to understand that my proximity to whiteness is probably why I even have a podcast today and I'm able to maintain it. My mother is Northern Slavey Dene or Satu Dene, but my Indian Act and Post status card by the Canadian government says Yellowknives Dene. Through my father, I am white, and a daughter of the Mayflower, a daughter of the American Revolution, while having a Canadian Indian Act and Post status card, which is a colonial construct by Canadian policies meant to divide Indigenous peoples' inherent rights. Indigenous Two Spirit, or the Indigenous 2S LGBTQ community, and Indigenous women are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder because of colonial trauma, imposed poverty, racism, gendered violence, and land theft. According to the 2023 Quality of Life report from the Calgary Foundation, 31% of racialized Calgarians cannot find suitable employment, which of course is why we are at the bottom of the Canadian socioeconomic ladder. I am not a social worker nor an elder, nor do I speak on behalf of all Indigenous, but I share my journey as a Dene mother navigating this colonial, misogynistic, racist world in 2024. As a trauma informed Dene woman who has attempted to run, joined harmful colonial parties, spent money to be at expensive conventions, left my home to travel to those conventions just to vote on incomplete policies that still allow for the incarceration, a denial of justice, a denial of health services, racism, colonial trauma, and genocide of Indigenous and Black peoples, I have worked to continue reports to advocate for and attempt to work within these systems meant to harm me and my community. I think of all of this today, and I hope we honor the many Indigenous lives lost for this so called country named Canada. I hope you see your role in the importance of stopping harm, and as a citizen, see your role in reconciliation and as a treaty partner. Pride Month should never just be 1 month. It's important to understand the straight agenda and gendered violence was and is forced on this land by Christian outsiders. Land acknowledgements are critical for creating a safer space for Indigenous, as well as honoring the host as an uninvited guest and acknowledging your role as a treaty partner in a so called time of reconciliation. Can they be performative? Of course. It's important land acknowledgements have that meaning. I encourage everyone to introduce themselves with an acknowledgement of their ancestors' story of displacement, how you perceive your role as a treaty partner, a citizen of Canada, a refugee, or other land displacement, so we as Indigenous people know how safe you are to be around. If you won't pronounce your local Indigenous nations' names, won't say your pronouns, won't say your story of origin, won't acknowledge stolen lands, won't acknowledge imposed economic oppression, your role in reconciliation, I determine how safe you are to be around my community, my family, and myself. Understanding land acknowledgements and their importance is Indigenous 101 because it immediately addresses colonialism, oppression dynamics, broken treaties, and lies taught today in Canadian schools nationally and retold on the media. That's why settlers and those who call themselves Native Calgarians or whatever town you're from show me you have no Indigenous 101 understanding. Jesse Winte's book, Unreconciled, explains this, as do many other Indigenous authored books. Land Back is a movement that could save the planet from climate change created by colonialism, but it would be a part of a treaty partnership, part of meaningful reconciliation, and honoring global initiatives like the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I'm speaking to you on the lands of the Niitsitapi, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy. The Blackfoot south of the imposed US-Canadian border are the Blackfeet. And I'm just going to mention that just this moment, Lily Gladstone just got her headdress for the amazing leadership that she has shown. And north of the border are Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani of the Confederacy. These lands are Treaty 7 territory and signed in September 22nd, 1877. Of course, those signatures include the Blackfoot Confederacy, but they also include the Goodstoney, Chiniki, and Bearspaw Nation of the Yiharhi Nation and the Dene from Tsuut'ina Nation. I acknowledge all First Nation, Métis, Inuit, status and non-status across Turtle Island as the keepers of these lands. All non-Indigenous are treaty partners with the government signing on your behalf. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening or watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear your feedback at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. Also, giving a review helps whatever medium you're listening from. I have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. And today, out of all days, I am quite lucky to have James Demers come onto my show. I will let you introduce yourself in your way, and then we're going to talk a little bit about International Trans Visibility Day.
Oh, thank you so much. I always love every opportunity to get to hang out with you. And sometimes, a lot of the time, we're in the middle of people screaming around us. So this is much calmer than how we normally get to hang out. But thank you, everyone. My name is James Demers. I use he/him pronouns. I'm a trans activist. I it's interesting. Like that was never the plan. Like that was never the brand. I just stumbled into this work because I was a homeless queer kid at 15, and I found drag, and then I found nonprofit, and then I found queer organizing, and I met the best people in the world, fighting for all of the things that have. There are many things that have happened in my life that I couldn't have imagined, but yeah, I've had a very kind of interesting tumble into this work, and I've often said like I do this work because like I'm a queer person and it also benefits me. But I think maturing into viewing this as an opportunity for solidarity is probably the thing I'm the most thankful for over the last 20 years. So getting to be here, I think, is a great honor, which I've said to you before, but I mean it. So thank you for having me.
Jeez. Well, I'm really grateful you're here, but that bigger picture is that I'm really humbled and honored to have you here. For me personally, I think we really met in about 2016. Maybe before that, I'd have to check our friends to see our Facebook to see when we became friends. But I want to say it was around that time, and it was around that time that Black Lives Matter Toronto had stopped the parade, the Pride Parade, and said, "Look, man, there's some racism in the queer community." And Calgary agreed. And we founded Voices. And we had some really hard conversations. And some of the folks who I am now friends with, I had blocked because of that time. And a lot
Good
of
times.
folks were like, "What is some straight cis woman doing in my circle telling me?" So somehow we've always continued to be in solidarity and work together and start unpacking some of this wildness. And
Mm,
of course, as a straight cis, I don't have the lived experience of what it's like to be queer, and I don't have the lived experience of what it's like to be homeless. I just statistically know rather than having that lived experience. And for me, I have great respect for the incredible journey you've had to go on in order to be here with me right now. At Trans Day of Remembrance, I heard the person who organized that say something that really has impacted me since. And it was that, where are our trans elders?
mm,
And we don't have a lot of trans elders for a reason. And so I want you to understand when I say I'm humbled and honored to have you on the show, it's because I know today is today, tomorrow is tomorrow, and tomorrow may not come, and that's not okay. And I don't want that. I want a better life, not just for you, for all trans and for the trans coming up. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
And I and very much, especially as a trans man, I find myself in a position where, while I have been unsafe in my life, it's not often in the same ways, right? Like that, there's a really important, that intersection of gender, it operates very, very differently for trans femmes and femme folks in that spectrum. And that's been always been a really interesting experience because I was a very queer child and then sort of transitioned into being less that on a regular basis. Like I joke that I wear my like asshole drag to protests, which is just like your standard, your standard Canadian tuxedo with a hat. And it does take people sometimes a minute. If I'm not on stage doing drag, it has this moment, but it does create this capacity, I think, where recognizing my privilege as a white man, right, moving through the world in terms of how people perceive me, it means recognizing that people may listen to me in ways they might not listen to others. And while that's not ideal, it's not the way I would like the world to work. It does create this responsibility to not only like jamming my foot in the door, but like yanking it open. Like that's my, so like there's this, I like to think about doing community work as just choosing to be a bridge, which is like choosing to have people walk all over you sometimes, but also choosing to like be the bridge between over difficult things to like to make that like active service, I think is how I've often thought about it. And so yeah, but recognizing that my capacity to be able to do that is also deeply influenced by the privilege that I have. I have capacity. And so with for me that becomes responsibility, which I've learned lots of different lessons about making that sustainable over time. But
Oh, right? I mean, my God, burnout is a real thing. And I just finished doing an episode where I kind of reintroduced myself, and I tried to really emphasize the point. I've never met an activist that wanted to be an activist. I've only met people who have experienced an injustice so harsh that they felt the only way they can do this is by trying to go on, I don't know, City Hall or wherever else that we thought was the appropriate place to try to talk about an injustice that we've faced. Because I can promise you, I had never at any point in my life woke up and thought ever I would be in a protest, probably the most impactful one, because I am straight and cis. I've been to many of ours where we've had literally neo Nazis being protected by police and black, trans, queer folks on the other side being mistreated by the police and allowing the freedom of speech of neo Nazis on the steps of City Hall. That has really affected me negatively, but the one that probably did the most was the one I did in front of Trans Canada for the Wet'suwet'en, when we had two rows of police, and I actually did feel like they were protecting me at that time, and hundreds of downtown oil workers screaming at the top of their lungs all sorts of awful things to me. That one was probably the worst one. And I just thought, it is a really sad day when Indigenous women, especially, were being mishandled by the RCMP and Wet'suwet'en, and you guys are so angry and want to keep your job so much that you're willing to mistreat me, mistreat them, and use the police in that way. It's been really eye-opening for me to change from, just a regular mom trying to, say, hey, this is racism, this is misogyny, to seeing the world through what now people call me an activist. I don't love that term, and vice versa. When did you realize that you're an activist, and how do you feel about that term?
I think that that term is used as a brand way too often. That's my primary feeling about it. I think that being an activist meant something, like it meant something really different in the 90s. There was no advantage to being an activist. No one wanted to talk to an community activist. There was no power, like if we
Yeah,
look at like ACT UP and the AIDS crisis, right? Like
yeah.
being an activist was the single most dangerous thing you could do, but these people were dying. There was no alternative, right? It was like you've got 6 months to live and all your friends are dying. You're going to do everything you possibly can. So there's this, but I see society and societal change as a much broader ecosystem because it often is. And in the same way, where you need people who have a great amount of lived experience to have a sense of perspective to say, like, hey, wait a minute, like I've experienced this before, and like maybe you should think twice about this. You also need teenagers to just completely destroy our language, turn it into something else, create this opportunity for identities to breathe that have always been here that we haven't created space for, right? So, like watching rainbow elders that I know coming out as gender fluid or gender queer in their 70s, I think is like the greatest gift of this push and pull between these two things, right? And so I think we need someone to be banging on the door of power in ways that seem totally audacious, because otherwise nobody's ever that door is never going to come down. Somebody's got to start that work, right? If we're picking away at these structures, somebody's got to be on the spoon end of that experience. And then it is everybody that kind of comes through that over time that makes these broad systemic changes. And so we need to we need to celebrate and support the people that are brave enough, because it is often the most marginalized of us, to be willing to say the audacious thing that could be possible, right? Like the divine right of kings was going to last forever, but it didn't, because we decided it wouldn't. And so it doesn't, I don't think a big audacious idea, I don't think it's totally unreasonable to say like, we should have universal healthcare, which includes prescription, dental, massage. There are all these things we could do, right? And like, instead of constantly trying to fill the gaps, why don't we raise the floor,
Mm,
right?
100%. Yep.
Like, why don't we, yeah.
I
So, and
love
that,
the way you frame that because I'm not going to lie, like the Two Spirit youth, they
mhm,
are pushing me in the best way possible. And I'm so honored to be pushed by them.
mhm.
Obviously, the whole concept in my world is 7 generations from now. And if they're saying, put that 2S in front, lady, you're damn right I'm gonna do that then.
Yeah,
Because they're
yeah,
pushing. Like I was just like, can you just include us? And they're like, shut the fuck up, bitch. You gotta put us front. We were here first. I'm like, okay,
yeah,
fair.
yeah.
Absolutely. Let's do that.
Yeah. And at the same time, your identity is vitally important, but like rainbow elders in my community teach me all the time that sometimes it's about persistence and sometimes it is about flexibility and communication, and talking to people who you might not agree with does eventually in some cases like create an inroad. And there's this, I'm really glad there's this oscillation between like, you're doing what? How does that word work? And then now I'm in the middle of that experience being like, what does that word mean to my younger performers? And at the same time, like, I'm so thankful for the shoulders of the people that I stand on. And I think
Yes.
my generation's responsibility really is to bring balance to the, like, I think of this as like cradle to the grave community support, right? From birth to death, what does it mean to be integrated into community in an affirming way? That's my goal in terms of community organizing. And we have LGBT seniors that are going back into the closet in long-term care, which is completely unacceptable, right?
No.
For the work that they did for us. And we have queer kids experiencing transphobia and homophobia from their government in a way that is, we thought we could really at least manage to some extent, right? We so like I remember saying out loud, like, well, at least it makes you like unvoteable and vote for a bull if you're a homophobe now, but this is sort of come back around like a scorpion's tail. And it's the end of it, but man, the death knell for this, like the patriarchy is just like holding on to this one.
Right?
I think
Babies.
Alberta's the holdout,
Yep.
like all the a bunch of those convoy organizers are from here. Like if we can kill it here, if we can like really, and we are, come back at them here and make a point, then it does have an impact on the rest of the country.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah. I just did a conversation about health inaccessibilities for Indigenous people, but I talked about Alberta in general, about the eugenics program and how that really created a big bunch of mistrust, even in non-Indigenous circles, etc. And so, like, yeah, Alberta can have a lot of rednecks, but we're not just a bunch of rednecks. We're also folks who have been harmed by the medical community, and because that's been kind of unaddressed and not really understood fully, and it's certainly not in our curriculum by the patriarchy, that there are some real harms that an intergenerational trauma that comes out of that. And then I would argue because of the attack on women's rights, and then of course trans and all gender affirming care, we're in a pickle. I've cried 3 days in a row over it because I was really happy and inspired to see Tegan and Sarah speak out at the Junos. But that day in Calgary was a big day because there was a massive tattooing thing happening in order to fundraise for Skipping Stone, which is the trans affirming nonprofit here in Calgary that's fundraising for legal battles to
Mhm.
take the Alberta government to court, unfortunately.
Oh yeah. Well, and like I got the update actually at the end of the day, but they raised $50,000 in a day, which is unreal, which means we have $50,000 more than we needed to sue the Alberta government into the ground to this. So we are ready to go. That is the other thing is an Albertan, a pissed off queer Albertan has always had to sue the Alberta government to get our rights in this country, and this is just happens to be our turn. So it was a Calgary City bus driver, that case that changed the criminal code in 69, and an Edmonton teacher that changed the protections for employment in 98. It's just our turn, and like it's been interesting. I'm an optimist because I do genuinely believe like there's possibility here.
Mm.
And when we got on the phone with the legal folks that are supporting a whole variety of cases, there's not just us suing the shit out of the Alberta government. There's a whole bunch of stuff coming down the pipes. Very excited. The mobilization is amazing. I mean, I've been getting calls from like large organizations that I had never expected to come on board. I have worked with so many incredible parents, just across the board, incredible groups of parents the last 3 or 4 years at protests, hiding, doing all of this incredible underground work, and like they're amazingly inspiring. So what this has done is what they've done. They've kicked the hornet's nest and then they gave us all of Pride season to organize. So be my guest. I can't wait. I like the affirming congregations who passed the conversion therapy ban are up, are engaged, and they're teaching each other how to talk to the media. They're explaining gender affirming care. Like I see the gallows humor of this is when people feel like their rights are threatened, they mobilize in these unbelievably creative ways. And that is why I do this. Like that's what's so incredible about it is the intention here is to recognize that all of Albertans are having their healthcare compromised, and
Yep.
trans people are a smokescreen, and the dignity of trans people is not on the table for debate here. What we do need to talk about is why are you dismantling our healthcare? And we can all find a common ground there. And so I see a lot of potential in what this could be. So if they've kicked a hornet's nest, then like here we come. I feel very confident that they're not going to politically or personally, in terms of their careers, survive this choice. And
Oh,
so
I
that's
hope.
mention.
Oh, I hope. Well, I
Yeah.
never thought Danielle Smith would be in this position after the Lake of Fire, because
No.
that was right in my writing at that time. And yet here she is premier, right? So, like, and I do talk about politics being, of course, it's about hard work, but it's also about timing. And sometimes it's just a bit of luck. And so somehow Danielle Smith found her way back into Alberta politics, and now as our premier out of all places. And I always had better hope for her because, a true libertarian, and I remember her once upon a time in a galaxy far, far away, being offended by the conservative camp that they have down in the States and them talking about going after women's rights and her being like, I don't think so. I'm a libertarian. Just stay right off my body. So I always had hope for her that she would mitigate those types of, let's go after the gays, let's go after the women type of conversations in her leadership. But the opposite has happened, where it's like those are things she's willing to cave on now. And so, really shocked to see her in this position and going after people in the way she is, but really inspired to. I hope my listeners are inspired after listening to you, because I see it. I see what the parents are doing behind the scenes. I see what a lot of the organizations in Alberta are doing. Of course, you and I do the, protests themselves. And then hearing Nenshi get behind, and doing, and people ask me, do you think he's going to run? I'm like, that was absolutely a campaign speech right then there. And then of course he said, yeah, we're going. And one of my favorite candidates just dropped out today in order to put her support behind Nenshi. So,
Mhm.
it is shocking to see this happen. All I know is I want to see Danielle Smith gone. I know Nenshi can do it. I can't take out a membership, but I can definitely encourage other people to take out an NDP membership, because that is the most viable party that's going to take out folks like Danielle Smith. Now, between you and I, I know the way the conservatives are. They are going to get rid of her in a second. She is
Mm,
not going to make the next election because no conservative leader does in this province.
yeah.
So, I'd be shocked if she actually did go up against Nenshi, but who will be the one who goes up against him will be kind of my like let's see this battle. Let's give her,
Oh, yeah.
you know.
I can't wait. And I mean, like, there's so for me, I mean, the UCP, they've been hollowed out, right? Like, we're really just talking Wild Rose. We're talking Take Back Alberta and Wild Rose. That's realistic.
Yep.
Most of the conservatives that have any facet of a conscience or had a kid come out in the last 20 years are in the NDP now. Like, this is the like that's a middle of the road party, but it's the Alberta NDP. And so, like, yeah, it's going to take some time to swing left in the ways that we need to, but the antics are not doing in their favor, working in their favor, right? Like, there's no legal precedent for these policy changes to be sustained. Like, it's in violation of the Canada Health Act and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. What this is she knows that they want to replace her, right? So, because she's starting to distance herself from Take Back Alberta already, and in this public way. And so she rolled this out across the desk to facilitate her leadership race campaign in the fall. And that's all that it is, right? She wants to say, like, look, we did the thing you asked us to do. And then if they get sued, they can say they can blame the feds about it. Right. This is the smokescreen that's happening, which is why when we talk about queer people being used as a political football, that's exactly
Yes.
what it is. And
Yep.
we can call it what it is. And this is the thing is, like, instead of allowing the smokescreen to exist, I think there's another conversation to be had, which is, the difference between an NDP and a UCP government in the last election was 1,300 votes,
Yep.
which is vanishingly small. And so 52% of the province didn't vote. And I recognize, especially people on the left, and I think this is important to say, feel disenfranchised. The NDP is not far left enough for them. There's all kinds of complicated conversations around, especially when we talk about colonialism and representation and all these pieces. And so I understand that people don't want to hold their nose and vote for someone that doesn't represent their values. I get it. I grew up trans in Alberta. Welcome to the I get it. I do. And at the same time, we are the government, but we have to get people in who are going to listen to us and not like five losers in their mom's basements in Grand Prairie. Like, we really need to get over this, and we need to do that in a way that creates groundwork between us. So for example, like, we need to find common ground between like Muslim communities, and we need support things like Palestinian resistance ubiquitously across our movements. We need to get more people unionized. We need to create advocates for healthcare and long-term care, affordable housing. This is all in our best interests, right? We should pay less car insurance. We should have utility caps. We should have free post-secondary education. And we would all benefit from that. And there's like 12 people that are preventing that from happening. And like, we can tax them and we know where they live. Like, none of this like, none of this is unsolvable. It's
No.
not that we don't have the infrastructure, and it's not that we don't know that, like, housing first would be a far preferable, far cheaper structure for dealing with homelessness in this country, and far safer for everyone across the board, more dignity, access to services. But we have to deal with the charitable sector and the way that they receive funding in scarcity in order to dismantle one piece to support another. And we can choose to do that. The things that are preventing us are this kind of like internal bickering in a lot of cases. And so much of it is important, right? Like, misogyny and racism within the queer community is a massive problem. Like, replicating the structures of sort of patriarchy within our organizations to feel powerful when we are often powerless is a problem, right? It's a problem internally with communities. But if we can't even have those conversations with each other, how do we expect to build bridges between people who have very different worldviews than us, who still have a right to healthcare and dignity and access to all of the services and infrastructure that we pay for? And I'm really interested in what that means, because there is like a, what do Buddhists call it, the middle way. There is a middle way. But I don't think it's going to exist. Well, it's not going to exist under capitalism in its current structure. We need to put regulations on where that resourcing is being allocated at the bare minimum if we want to start anything productively in that way, right? UBI is a really interesting proposition potentially in that vein. It's not perfect, but yeah.
Oh, absolutely. We've seen the benefits of that during the pandemic when federally they gave living wages to a lot of folks who wouldn't normally have that. And their lives dramatically improved because they had somewhat of a living wage. And I mean, it can argue the 2000 a month is it? But at the end of the day, it was a huge improvement for a lot of people in their lives. So I think that UBI is a major issue that we should be talking about. And I mean, I have all of these recommendations when it comes to, RCAP and the calls to justice and the calls to action. But at the end of the day, if we had universal basic income, like, oh, so much of that would be eliminated. I would love
Yeah.
to nothing more in the world than to see basically child welfare being eliminated because everybody has basic income, right?
Hmm.
And that's the truth. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
When you look at, like, mental health is the conversation we're always talking about, right? But I would posit that if everybody had 2 extra grand in their pocket a month, the amount of strain that would be relieved from people just, and, like, look at what rent is like in Calgary right
Yeah.
now. It's totally untenable. Yeah, it is unfathomable to me. I worry about my friends all the time. Like, I
Same.
feel, and I like, so it's complicated. And this is the broad thing, is like, who's benefiting from that though?
Right.
Because it can't be like, why do we just, I was really hoping over COVID there would be a stronger, like, renters movement around, like, actioning these kinds of controls and protections, because there's so many more people that are renting. So, and that's part of the thing, right? Is it's very easy for conservatives and for ultra conservative movements to sort of play on our empathy and shock us into just being totally overwhelmed by the completely absurd things that they say and do. But we can centralize the power that it is like present in the many of us, if we can find something to find common ground on and push for it. Like, there's a lot that I think would really benefit us across the board. Like, we need to start being really careful about, the convoys are really interesting. It's going to be a really interesting moment in Canadian history, because we're having very different conversations about governments removing the right to protest. Like, look at the infrastructure bill that we're dealing with right now, right? And I know that that's become a problem for Indigenous activists, Palestinian activists. Eventually, someone's going to try to use it against queer activists. I'm not surprised, wouldn't be surprised. And so, like,
Let's just make the point that was in place in Alberta before the convoy. And we've seen the police not enforce it against white people. And
mhm,
we also seen that only now that all of those convoyers are not doing the protesting, that they are indeed enforcing against the basically people of color, the Palestinians, and primarily Muslims, so brown people. And
yep,
so that's not okay. That is like full out racism by the justice system, what, starting at the policing level and going up to the Alberta and municipal govern the different orders of governance. And by the way, I think you were about to finish a thought about encouraging the far left to vote, even
mm.
though they are disenfranchised. Did you want to finish that thought?
Yeah, yeah. So broadly, if we want to create, like, we have to find reasons to move the needle forward together. And it does actually mean putting people into positions of power, because that's the structure we have, who actually will be influenced. And we've seen this happen before. I think Nenshi's actually a good example. The NDP in Alberta, they actually did a lot of really good work. I mean, they cut child poverty in half in 4 years, right? Like,
Well,
there's
I would
benefit.
say the federal government had a big part
Yeah.
of that. And if I was Rachel Nolly, I'd pretend like it was all me too. But it was the combination
That's
of two things. And it was her great policies combined with Justin Trudeau's great policies.
yeah.
So those two helped reduce that.
Yeah, exactly, right. And often, so the thing about it is often the right just undermines moralistically superstars on the left, because they actually create a huge draw. Jack Layton is an excellent example of this, and, like, early in Justin Trudeau's career is an example of this, right? Gender balanced cabinet, all of these different policy, like, there were a lot of community organizations that got money. The Department for Women and Gender Equality was created. It's not like there's nothing, right? But we just love tearing each other apart so much. I think we need to start thinking broadly about, because since the 80s, the right has been constructing this, right? Joining school boards, focus on the family, campaigning, sending people into municipal elections. Like, now we're suddenly going, oh, school boards. So, but, like, if you really want a leftist world, if you really want that success, we are going to have to work for it. And that means you're going to have to vote. Because if we even got
That's the
25%,
minimum
yeah.
engagement as a citizen,
Yep.
actually. And the easiest, I would even argue. I would
Mhm.
argue it's actually the easiest. And like, even for me, I'm an Indigenous woman. The last people I should be trumpeting are freaking liberals. And
Mhm.
yet I am, because, like you said, you got to look at what the alternatives are here. And no offense to my NDP friends, but under Tom Mulcair, that was not the option for me
Is it
in
going to
any
work?
capacity. So, yeah.
Yeah. And similarly, right? Like I have an enormous amount of respect if we look at the NDP leadership race, just in the like in the immediate future. I have an enormous amount of respect for the work and allyship that both Sarah Hoffman and Kathleen Ganley have enacted to the community. They're excellent politicians. They make great policy. I'm thrilled that they're in cabinet fighting like hell for us. I have no qualms about that. When it comes to winning a provincial election, though, the challenge they've always had is winning Calgary. That is what Nenshi brings to the table fundamentally. And he's so mad. It's really nice. It's really nice to see him like go for it. And I was proud of his speech. I got the feeling, which I haven't gotten from him before, that he was sort of like surprised and dismayed. He was like, "Hey, you've got to be kidding me." Was really like kind of the feeling, and good because I'm
Yeah.
well beyond that.
Well,
So,
he said the
you know,
words because he, like, him and Danielle Smith have been in the same circles for decades at this point. And he said, "My good friend Danielle, like, this isn't you."
yeah,
And I couldn't agree more because, like, I don't respect her politics, but I was raised with this ridiculous respect for other people,
mm,
and people in positions of power. You respect, leadership in general. I was, I took leadership training when I was a teenager. Like, this is something that I respect and understand. So, like, our politics have changed so much in the last, say, 4 years that, like, nobody respects anybody, and that's really problematic. So, obviously, I'm with you. Lost respect for Daniel Smith a long time ago. I wouldn't have said it as nicely as Mr. Ninchi did. So, props to him for
yeah,
trying to say it in a kind way. But man, oh man, it is so beyond. I always tell people the first people that attacked trans was Nazis. And
yeah,
I will never ever like finish saying that, because
mm,
it is fundamentally, when you start attacking the queer community, that's where Hitler started. And I
yeah,
I, I will never like deviate from that. So if you want to go down the road of fascism, like, that's where you're starting, and that's what we're seeing in Alberta. This is literally making me cry daily
yeah,
over it, because I just can't believe we're here, as a society, to get to this point. But at the same time, that's also giving too much to the past. And like you said, I've been on strong shoulders thanks to previous generations that have put up with ridiculous fascism in the city, in this province, and in this country, as Indigenous people. And so, I don't like holding up colonial politicians in any capacity, because of the lack of movement on reconciliation and the lack of change that we've really seen. That said, I can also go on about some really good and positive things that we've seen. I just shared yesterday the city of Calgary putting out engagement over the zoning issue, which I was
mhm,
really surprised about, because I just don't see a lot of engagement with Indigenous people locally on municipal level. And I experienced that firsthand when I ran. So, for me, I was happy to see the city at least put it out there, because urban Indigenous people, are educated folks who have the right to talk about that within a municipal setting. Obviously, not on top of the Blackfoot Confederacy and the Treaty 7 partners, but having a voice at the table. So that these are positive changes that I've seen. I want to see more conversation between the city and the Treaty 7
mm,
leadership. Obviously, like, things just not going forward without their consent. And I mean consent, not like, we sent an email, oh, what more do they want, you know which
mhm,
has been the history for, well, the city never sent that email prior to 2015. Things have changed so much since 2015, and I'm really proud of that. And I want that to continue. I want there to be engagement with all communities, not just some. So, that bigger picture. And honestly, just hearing you speak to, I like, are you ever considering running for politics?
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's in the cards. I've thought about it before. I like there's some broad structural things that I think if we really want to share power, right? If we want to be a nation of nations, if that is if internation relationships is what we want to achieve, I would think with First Nations and Inuit and Métis populations. Like, I think we do it in much more concrete ways than we're doing it now. So, for example, I think that there should be a secondary component to the legislature and to government where like there is a designation of Indigenous leaders where they are a layer of decision making, similar to how the Senate and House of Commons are organized. I think the Senate should be all Indigenous leadership. I think it's totally ludicrous that they aren't if there isn't a 50-50 power share in the laws that are passed in this country. Like, especially looking at like the Oka crisis and Elijah Wells and like that process, right? Like that was such an important, so like to recognize the lack of consultation with Indigenous communities, like where have we gone from there, right? Why not create actually share the power structure? If that scares you, it should.
Yes,
It should.
100%.
Fine. You
100%.
know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I'm totally into that, right?
but
Like, good. Then like deal with your feelings about that and let's share this land appropriate. Like, we have the opportunity to do this in a way that, the States is not doing anything even close to this, and the things that we have done are minimal at best. But like, what could we do with this
yeah.
relationship building? I think there's so much potential there. And I think starting to give like, I think doing things like handing back all of the national parks, like making sure that our infrastructure has equity across, like, I think that you should get the same internet access and access to drinking water and infrastructure in the center of a reserve in the middle of northern Ontario as you do in the center of Toronto. There's no excuse that why would it's totally ludicrous, right? Like, why don't we have high-speed internet access in the north? Give me a fucking break. Like that's not an infrastructure problem. That's a capitalism problem. We can
A
solve that,
100%. And that's
you
the
know?
best way to frame it. And it's just so depressing to me how little people are willing to look outside that box. I had a lot of hopes 10 years ago, and now I've become a lot more jaded. But I know that there are new folks coming up that are excited and as enthusiastic as you are and seeing that greater potential. And my hope is that one day we will get there. And I think we will, because it's interesting how many people, settlers especially, assume that we want to kick out all the settlers, and we've never
Yeah.
said that as Indigenous community. We've said that we want to have more control, and that doesn't mean just kicking people out. That means that we're going to adapt and we're going to have say, rather than there being no say up to this moment. So really happy to hear you excited about possible future. And you wouldn't happen to be interested, are you talking about a school trustee, are you talking about municipal, talking federal, or are you talking about provincial?
I'm torn between municipal and provincial, because I would like to, it's partially, it's an influence thing. Like, I'd like to
Yeah.
be able to, so I would really like to see public servants recognize their service position more often than they do. So for example, I think that all public servants should make minimum wage. And if that's not good enough for them, then they should be motivated to do something about it. And I think that that's a good place to start, to be completely honest, where I'm like, okay, fine. Like, if you're a public servant, you're serving the public, you should be serving the public right in the middle of the public experience, right? Like, I don't think you should be allowed to be in office if your kids are in private schools. Not
Right.
interested, right?
I
Like,
I have a real issue. We were talking about rental earlier.
mm,
How many politicians are landlords?
yeah,
It is shocking to me that these are the people that are in control. And at the end of the day, too, like I'm going to say this because I experienced it twice when I ran. If you are left, if you legitimately care about, our politicians and who's getting in there, why aren't you doing more? Not just that bigger picture of actually doing the vote, that bigger picture of endorsing, volunteering, that bigger picture. Because if you're not doing those things, then you and I are not going to win. But somebody who has, three real estate pieces of land, and all of the developers are going to be like, well, this person has six pieces of property. We're going to obviously support them over, homeless James. Like that, that's a real conversation. And I wish that more people who claim to care about politics could see that we do need to be doing multiple fronts of work. And that's what I do, that's what you do, that's what we see success in, is multiple fronts of tackling the same issue, not just one way. And activism is not one of those things that I ever thought that for me I would be a part of. But now seeing that, that this is such a wonderful world, of course I want to be a part of community organizing, as well as the other different stages as well. What are your thoughts on that?
yeah, I think the thing is, I think you need to pick obviously we operate in solidarity with each other, but we can't be experts in all things. So, for example, like as a gender diverse person, I actually don't need someone I'm working with to know what it means to be trans. It's almost impossible for me to convey that, right? But we can respect each other. We can break bread together. We can see where we can operate in each other's best interest, and I don't think it takes a catastrophic change to create equity in a system, right? So like rent, for example, right? Part of the problem, like what I think what might be more practical is landlords aren't taxed as businesses. And I think that's one of the fundamental issues. And it addresses two things, right? Because they're not taxed as businesses, it's really difficult to maintain upkeep. So that's where you end up with like really dangerous rental suites, illegal suites, all of these problems. And that's just disrespectful to human beings. Like if human dignity is the baseline, right?
Yeah.
And so I think like once you own if you own a house and another property, fine. I can find a middle ground compromise there, whatever. Once you own three, though, like once we're talking 3 units, 50 units, like you're a business. And so you should
Right.
be taxed like a business. And what that would do is, yes, there would be less landlords. But if the housing supply redistributed itself, right? If people didn't own 5 or 6 of these and we had a better balance of renters and homeowners and a better consideration for how we regulate maintenance so we all have safe homes. Like this doesn't feel like a radical position to me by any stretch of the imagination. Yes, we do have to address the resource hoarding that is creating the rental market problem, which is keeping people in poverty. And then we criminalize that poverty and we wonder why the system doesn't work. That's fixable. Like this is the thing. It's like, yes, that's overwhelming. But that's because, you have people in enforcement and social work and community development, and like everyone is trying to plug the gaps in the system, but it's a sieve. We need to resurface it. It needs to operate differently and it needs to operate in a person-centered context. And like that's not impossible. That structural change is actually doable, but we have to stop interfering in every possible way for that to happen because four dudes will make less money. Like
Mhm.
absolutely not. We have to start reevaluating it.
I have two good stories to tell you.
Mm,
One was by chance on Saturday morning, I was listening to the CBC radio, and I never do. And they had a conversation that they were having at a Hinton coffee shop. And the entire town of Hinton showed up to the coffee shop on the CBC to be there. Apparently, they just recently lost their local newspaper. So they were actually really talking positively about the CBC and about media coming to their town, and they were really, of course, trying to pump themselves and anyway. So something that really stuck with me was that the mayor of Hinton spoke, and he said, the discourse in politics is really bad. However, I do want everyone to remember Hinton isn't a Facebook group, and whoever is posting in that Facebook group does not speak for all of Hinton. And it was
mm,
really clear, and I'm sure anybody listening to this could go back and listen to the recording. You get that from listening to that. There were people that were like, and when you told me that small town Alberta in the middle of Hinton was excited for the CBC to come and speaking positively about local media and speaking positively about the CBC, probably wouldn't have believed you, but it's there. It's like there's proof. It is absolutely there. And then I was listening to Ryan Jesperson, and he had on there the president for the municipalities, and he's also the mayor of Wetaskiwin. And it was really interesting hearing him speak. And he actually put out on his personal Facebook, um, he basically said, look, I didn't want to give any attention to negative comments and such that are going out there, but the Facebook group is saying this and saying this and saying this, and he really broke down why they're wrong. and
mm.
and I thought, good on you for doing it. And then, of course, being on Ryan Jesperson talking positively, because he is the president for the Alberta Association for Municipalities. The importance of the different orders of government and the different acts that control the different orders. And of course, these are things I understand because I'm a nerd, and I wish I didn't, but I do, and that's why I felt empowered enough to run. But the hope is that other people see that and just see that that there is limits in what you can do in some of these positions, but there is, that leadership matters. And when you see somebody like a Janice Irwin speaking on behalf of the queer community, that fills my heart. And seeing her in that position, or Brooks Arcan in his position, that fills my heart to see them advocate properly for themselves. And in Brooks perspective, both the indigenous as well as the queer community, we need to see that. So I want you to run. I want to support you. I want to endorse you. I want to volunteer for you. I want to fundraise. I want to do all the things that I know would make you successful. But that bigger picture is that my hope is that people hear you and are inspired to run too, because we need people to run for local school trustees. We need people to run municipally. We need people to run for the MLAs. Like, it's just good democracy. I would love to run for the Alberta Liberals again if we had a leader that would support me to do that. Right now, I don't. So that is not a role for me right now, but one day in a healthy democracy, I hope we do. And that's what I want. I just want a healthy democracy. I want people to remember, and I want to be able to brag of about our federal policies and the provincial policies that we put forward. Well, obviously I was proud of them then. That bigger picture is that every party should have that opportunity, and every person should, if they feel that strongly, run for the Communist Party. If you're left and that's the only group of people that are standing in solidarity with you at a Palestinian event or whichever event that you're at, then run for them, because they need you. Same with the Green Party. They need people to run for them. Now, I want people to win, so I may not necessarily encourage them to run for certain parties, but that bigger picture is that I just want people to see themselves as an engaged citizen, as part of a healthy democracy. And if you can't go on the front lines as an activist, you can put your name on a ballot, and that bigger picture, then you can engage with your neighbors. When you actually run and you have to go door to door to your neighbors and ask them, would you allow me to be on your ballot? That's an interesting conversation. And I think one of my previous candidates that I volunteered for, he said, everyone needs to run. Everyone needs to see who their friends are, that bigger picture too. And so, yeah, I got to see who my friends were. But that bigger picture of, understanding the system with that different lens, with that different hat, it matters. So I want to see everybody. And I mean, there's no reason why you can't run and be an activist too, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's it, right? Like there's a difference between being, and it's different ways of applying pressure to the power structure. You can be an activist, which often means you have the least amount of power, but you have the most amount of control when it comes to messaging. So
Yeah.
you lay the social messaging, you put the ideas into the discourse, you're sort of cracking on the edge of the front of that. There's advocacy, which is when you have a middle ground power position within an institution. So you're an advisory council, or you're organizing a community group, or right, or it's a form of lobbying, arguably, if we're talking politics. And so like advocacy is a very different position. And what is important is making sure that the power you do have is actually enforceable and from an advocacy position. And then there's being a leader. There's making a choice where you actually are the person with the position, with the ideas. You can dictate to make something happen, right? And if we don't look at having power as good or bad, but we look at the effects of the way we use it as what's important. So who does it affect? Who does it harm? Practically, what does that mean? It's going to be imperfect in lots of cases, right? There's
Mhm.
sometimes not a perfect solution. But if we are more thoughtful about power and we're less afraid of it, then we will be less afraid of sharing it, which is the
Mhm.
single most important thing, right? So many of us are living paycheck to paycheck in scarcity that we're terrified to change anything because we're genuinely afraid we'll starve. Like that is, if we're talking realistically, most people live in the space of poverty. And people who get out of poverty, that is their number one fear, right? You see this in horror movies all the time, is that sort of like return to hopelessness or powerlessness. And so eh, queer people have always been really good at like choosing to be audaciously excited about our potential future, even when it didn't feel like that was possible. Like there's an audacity in glitter and noise and being like, oh, we don't have rights, we're gonna have a parade. Like that, do you know what I mean? The audacity of that is what's so powerful about it. And I mean, what is it, between now and 2041, there's going to be a sevenfold increase in the number of Indigenous folks within the country, which is the most significant increase since first contact. Like we are living in a world increasingly where our neighbors are exactly the people next to us. So, and I'm really excited for what that means, right? Like we're a country, we're a really unique country in the world, and like it is our job to resolve how do we move forward in relationship to together. And I'm excited for what that means.
Good.
I think.
I'm glad. Um, I know you and I could talk for 3 hours straight, and we probably shouldn't. So I just wanted to ask you, was there anything more that you wanted to talk about today? And especially with the idea of Trans Visibility Day coming up on the 31st.
Yeah. So two things. Well, three. The first one's easy. People who are comfortable, if we're looking into opportunities for allyship right now, one of the places, and you mentioned this, that we're really looking for people to get engaged is school board elections.
Yeah.
This is going to be really, really important. And so if in your own internal capacity you think like, yeah, I could go to a school board meeting, or like, oh, sure, I wouldn't mind getting involved in that way. Queer Citizens United in particular, we're hoping to connect people with their local community organizers, pride organizations, wherever they are, because there's the same number of school board districts as there are electoral districts provincially. There's 87 of them. So we're looking for folks to run and monitor those. So if people are interested, that's actually a really productive way they can get directly engaged, and we'd be happy to facilitate that.
I'm just going to engage slightly there because since they made changes to the Municipalities Act, there has been a caveat where school boards could actually appoint an Indigenous school trustee. None have chosen to. I have
Mhm.
asked my allies to encourage their school boards to appoint an Indigenous liaison. None have. So I'm just going to, one, encourage Indigenous people to run, but two, I also encourage whoever your candidates are, ask them if they would be in favor of appointing an Indigenous school trustee after the election, because the truth is we need Indigenous people at these tables. So that it's a harmful position, I'm not going to lie, because obviously we don't have anti-racism policies in place in order to protect racialized folks being at these tables. However, as Indigenous people, we've had to put up with settler bullshit since time immemorial too. So we'll just keep going at it. But that bigger picture, that you can ask the school trustees that are running to be in favor of appointing Indigenous school trustee. And I hope if you are considering running as a queer person or anyone as an ally for queer community, you also consider being an ally to Indigenous people and being a part of that solution too. So please go on with two and three, James.
Yeah. No, and so yeah, so that's one piece of it. The other piece of it is it's very important for cisgendered allies in any context to choose to have a deliberate relationship with their own internal sense of gender. So a lot of the ways in which trans and gender diverse people, the ways in which we are restricted, or the barriers we experience in the world are about cisgendered people's feelings about policing gender, not about ours. And so that anxiety actually is what creates the most barrier for us in the world. And so if you have a conscious relationship with your own gender, it's a gift that nobody can take from you. And the last time you got dressed up to go out or were going on a date and felt really good, that feeling, that's gender euphoria. And all of us have access to that if we choose to access it. And so that's often what we are looking for when we're trying to find a centered sense of ourselves. And in that moment, you can often tell what things you do to support your gender identity that make you feel really good. And we all sort of have moments of this. Sometimes this is features and sometimes this is a feeling. And then we have things that we do for other people. It makes our partner excited. It makes our mom happy, whatever. And some of those things bother us. They really bother us, and we try to sort of crush them down. And some of them don't make a huge deal. And if you can make distinctions between what you're comfortable with in the scope of your own gender identity and not just the expectations of your gender identity, that comfort, that will make gender variant people far more practical in the ways in which we think about gender. We think like, oh, that's just a different color that we are using. It's all the same. We're all painting together, right? And so gender diversity is not about neutralizing gender. Gender's awesome and it's fun to play with. We just want to expand the color options that are available to us and stop policing the ways in which we create from that perspective. So having a relationship with your own gender is really important. And then that leads to the third piece, which is please talk to your friends and family about the dignity of trans people, and that trans people deserve the same healthcare that everyone deserves. Gender affirming healthcare was created for cisgendered folks, right? And then it works really well for trans people in a particular guided context, right? And there's 80 years of peer-reviewed medical science that supports gender transition across the world. It's excellent work. And so we absolutely know who we are, and it's in your best interest for your healthcare that we also have the same access to healthcare. So we're in this together.
100%. I'm really proud to have you on today, James, and I welcome you back anytime. And especially if you're going to be running, I'd love to, have that conversation as you go and hopefully encourage people to support you as we go. So, thank you so much for being on my show today. I really appreciate you taking the time, especially considering all of the wildness that is happening in our world right now with fundraising, the government existing. Like it's enough.
Yeah. It's a few things, but you know what? The best people you'll ever meet in your life, you will be standing at a protest with or like organizing online with. Like it is wickedly cool. So it is the benefits far outweigh the consequences. And like, what could we do? Like the possibilities are that's fun.
Well,
So
and I'm not gonna lie, it is absolutely the queer community that has helped me heal in like so many different things, whether it's the colonial imposed beauty system.
mm,
And because I have seen drag kings, it was the first time I was like, "Oh shit, I think I would be okay with that." And I never had those conversations before as a younger indigenous girl in the middle of Sylvan Lake, Alberta.
mm.
Certainly never had those conversations about anything like that. So I just for me too, in our activist circles, it's always the two spirit or the gender diverse folks who speak up that bring in the bigger out of the box thinking. I am so grateful to you. I'm grateful to our Two Spirit community for just pushing us in such a good way, in a healthy way as well. So just thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for making time for me today.
Oh, and same, and thank you. And I'm sure I will see you again soon. But yes, no, thank you for the space and for all of your work. So happy to make good trouble with you anytime.
Yes, good troublemakers. That's what we should call this episode is good trouble.
Good trouble. Well, and that comes from, I'll give credit, that idea comes from Bayard Rustin. So he was a Black activist and he crossed over between the civil rights work and the queer world. He was a gay man, he was Black, and he's one of the architects of the Million Man March on Washington. In fact, he was the primary advisor who convinced Martin Luther King to adopt a policy of nonviolence. And this was shortly after Martin Luther King's church was bombed. So it was a really intense time. And
Wow.
yeah, and he spanned this really amazing. He died in 2003, and then all of his information was published because, in order to protect his work in the civil rights movement, his queerness was censored and back and forth. He had this really interesting life. And one of my favorite quotes from him is every community needs a group of angelic troublemakers.
What a perfect quote and a perfect
Yeah.
way to end the podcast. Thank you again, James.
Mm.
Oh, folks, well, I can't encourage you enough. If you are not a part of a reconciliation committee in your area, please join one. Here in Calgary, we have the Reconciliation Action Group. This is a group of people that came from the Indigenous Book Club that, were educated on the issues and wanting to do more in a time of reconciliation. And I want to see more people do more for reconciliation in general. I'm proud that this podcast gives those solutions, includes cultural safety training and cultural first aid in all of them to create a safer space for Indigenous people of color, those with disabilities, and 2S LGBTQ to speak. According to the 2023 Quality of Life report from the Calgary Foundation, 88% of racialized Calgarians feel uncomfortable or out of place because of their religion, ethnicity, skin color, culture, language, accent, gender, or sexual orientation, which is up 75% from 2022. And I would imagine now, in light of the Palestinian issue, we're going to see it go up from 75% to 88% to more. Anyway, and I should say Palestinian genocide, not issue. It's genocide. 84% of racialized Calgarians believe racism exists, and only 66% of non-racialized Calgarians believe that. So for folks who don't believe that there's racism, please start working on your anti-racism training because racism exists. Canada's founded on it. It's founded thanks to the Indian Act. Anyway, I want to say thank you to Cheryl Ward, Chelsea Branch, and Alicia Fritkin of here to help.bc.ca. They have a wonderful section on what is Indigenous cultural safety and why I should care about it. Those are cultural action tools or cultural first aid. So please support Indigenous work like that as part of your reconciliation work and settler understandings. I'm just lucky enough to highlight and repeat them here. Internalized racism or lateral violence is another form of violence oppressed groups face by the structure of racism imposed on these lands. I talked a lot about it in my last podcast. But Donna Bevins, a Black activist from racialequitytools.org, has put together amazing amounts of resource files on all sorts of subjects related to racial issues. So if you are a part, again, of those Calgarians that don't understand racism exists, you need to get on racialequitytools.org. She has a great section on what is internalized racism. I go back to it regularly because we are constantly dealing with it. Anyway, do's and don'ts for bystander intervention by American Friends Service Committee has some great ideas on how to intervene in a good way when you do see racism. Report to act to end racism.ca put out a fantastic report about how much racism that the Asian community here in Alberta is facing. So you can go to act and the number 2 end racism.ca to learn more about them as well and get on their email list because they are doing great work for the Asian community here. For anyone that follows me on my social media, I would like for you to watch the anti racism organizational lead for the city of Calgary, who gives a great presentation on the journey of becoming an anti racism leader. I think everyone should be striving to be an anti racism leader. Locally, our Black Lives Matter activists Taylor McNally and Adora Nofor are being legally targeted. Please go to Stop the Stack YYC if you do not understand, if you do not believe racism exists. Please read those resources and see not only does it exist, but the legal system itself is targeting single Black mothers in order to silence them. And I think that is pretty sad and pathetic that all these people have the power to murder people are scared of 2 single Black women who are just speaking some truth. Indigenous people have been talking about our issues, our traumas and reports commissions and in public hearings just so it can be regularly disregarded. City of Calgary. Oh my God, I'm so shocked that there's so much racism in the city. Ugh, no more. Honor our words, honor the treaties, listen to politicians and their policies and platforms. If they don't recognize the marginalized in their budget with Gender Equity Plus, if they're cutting violence prevention programs, services, Indigenous education, uterus health choices, gay straight alliances, gender affirming care, lack of human rights for migrants, immigrants, folks with disabilities, know that your vote to that party or person directly negatively impacts equity deserving people. Demand that they implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's 94 calls to action, the recommendations of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, the multiple reports about child welfare reform, violence prevention, and now 231 calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, and Two-Spirit. Provincially, we have the 113 pathways to justice, so all the blue voters should be holding the Premier's Council on to task on it. And we have the White Goose Flying Report. There's a new report that just came out of Lethbridge that talks about the abhorrent racism that is there. Denying these reports is a form of abuse called gaslighting. Our people are experiencing extreme racism in every institution from media, health, education, justice, with multiple reports that say the same thing. Demand change from election platforms and politicians. If they don't understand colonialism, racism, privilege, sexism, they have no business running. This should be understood by everyone, local politicians, community organizations, sports clubs, nonprofits, community associations, everything you can think of. You can Google articles on how non-Indigenous Canadians can become allies. Also, the Calgary Foundation has a great ally toolkit that you can go to their website and see more there. Stephanie Harp and I had an emergency podcast over a year ago, hoping that our allies would reach out and do more about the crises that we're facing. So I strongly had supported the women's homelessness.ca urgent action to protect the lives of Indigenous women, girls, Two Spirit, and gender diverse experiencing homelessness. But instead, we've seen everybody support our politicians for taking doors off of bus shelters in -40 weather. Um, to say I'm disappointed and dismayed is an understatement. I'd love to see more community engagement, and thankfully, James and I talked a lot about that today. I also encourage you all to sign up at aboriginalalert.ca and the Missing Children Society of Alberta. They have apps as well, if that helps. I also wanted to talk a little bit about the drug crisis that we're facing. Drug poisoning deaths in Alberta are ridiculously high, setting new records. If you know someone that is using substances, just encourage them not to use alone. If you are using alone, you can contact the National Overdose Response Service at 1-888-688-NORS for support and create a safety plan so that you don't die. Download the Brave, Doors, or Lifeguard app as well. I strongly support Freedom's Path Recovery Society. You can also donate there. They provide free one on one addictions counseling services. Group treatment for recovery in Alberta are queer friendly and anti racist. And as many of you have heard, I've been fully supporting Canada's first US LGBTQ addiction recovery center, stonewallrecovery.ca. You can also give donations there. If you're experiencing emotional distress after anything I talked about today and need to talk, you can call the First Nation and Inuit Hope for Wellness Helpline at 855-242-3310. It is toll free, open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You can also go to their website, hopeforwellness.ca. They have a little text box there. And if more related to missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, and Two Spirit, you can call 844-413-6649. And for folks who are part of the 60 Scoop, you can also go to ssisa.ca to be a part of their email sign up as well. Indian Residential School Survivors and Family Hotline is 866-925-4419, and the Native Youth Crisis Hotline is 877-209-1266. For non-Indigenous, there are distress center lines in your area, sometimes the functioning 211, as well as the new number of 988. They had the old number of 833-456-4566, or you can text at 45645. You can go to crisisservicescanada.ca for even more. The Kids Help Phone, 1-800-668-6868. For more 2S LGBTQ crisis supports, first I want to say thank you to lifevoice.ca and the Trevor Project. You can go to lifevoice.ca for all sorts of crisis supports lines. Trans Lifeline is 877-330-6366, and the youth is 866-844-7386. Violence is my everyday reality. Every Indigenous generation has faced it. This is self-care, how I take my power back. It's why I started the podcast, to speak freely without interruption, tone police, leadership shaming, gaslighting questions, as many people don't want to hear Indigenous opinion. They sure like to tell us theirs, even if they know nothing about oppression dynamics, us, colonialism, the constant surveillance of our people, protests, vigils, and rights. I and many others share info on microaggressions daily. It is unacceptable to say them anymore. Learn about being trauma informed. Folks like me are dealing with internalized racism or gatekeeping. Folks that survive off the status quo, people who are in their trauma, stop people from being able to do the work they need to do, deplete personal resources. Internal and external racism is an everyday reality for me, other Indigenous peoples, folks with disabilities, QT BIPOC, and more. Masi Cho to my ancestors, to my granny and my mom, what strength looks like through your example. I want to thank my dad for teaching me to be strong and blunt, my stepmom for showing me what a proud culture is through her Austrian family roots and teaching me to be a proud Calgarian. It is through her I am a second generation Calgarian. I want to say thank you to my husband, Darcy, for producing and editing the show, on top of being my husband, childhood friend, father of our child, and my support of the Red Road. He has witnessed decades of racism and sexism. And to our child, we are blessed to learn from you daily. We are honored you chose us. You give me daily accountability to be a better and stronger person. I hope my family will be proud in the future of us trying to discuss these present day issues in a way that they can understand. And I also want to say, because if there's one thing a settler recently taught me, it's just that by thanking my husband doesn't mean that I'm not a massive contributor to this podcast. In fact, all he does is look at little lines and jokes about me doing all the work. So I hope that just by me thanking my family, it doesn't undermine my contribution. I also want to honor the Blackfoot and the elders and members as they've been kind to me on my Red Road journey as I am an uninvited guest on their land. Elder Red Crane taught me how to pronounce my spirit name in Blackfoot, and Leonard Kenny taught me how to pronounce my name in Satu Dene. My humblest apologies to any language keepers as I try to learn proper pronunciation. My Patreon account is Native Calgarian, where you can pledge and support. Thank you, previous donors, for showing your support. If you value listening and watching and can afford to give, thank you. For those who cannot afford to give, I'd love to hear from you at nativeyyc@gmail.com, where you can send in your comments or questions. I also have a YouTube channel that you can go and subscribe. You can go to nativecalgarian.com for the latest podcasts and pin posts on social media. I'd also like to do a touch grass moment because there are a lot of things that I talk about, um, and that we see on social media that, sometimes we just need to reconnect to the world that's just not so much on screens. And last week, I talked a little bit about my Mr. Hugo boss, and it was a really funny conversation. But this week, I wanted to really give a shout out to my auntie. I talk a lot about my aunts and uncles, and one of my aunties was the first Dene woman to ever practice law in Alberta, and she's won a Women in Law Leadership Award in Alberta, and I'm really honored to have her in my life. She is the reason why I have my Indian status. She worked really hard for my mom when my mom and dad were going through a hard divorce. She has helped so many folks with housing issues, with Indian residential school settlements, and is just an overall amazing person that's helped the bands up in the Edmonton area. So I just wanted to let folks know, like, there are bigger things in this world, and I never want you to give up hope. And I certainly hope you never give up hope from listening to this podcast, because from my point of view, we are always looking at solutions and possibilities in the hopes that we can create a better world. But I definitely want to end by giving side eye to those Calgary rabbits. You're lucky I'm not tradish. My beautiful cousin would respond, or you'd be in my dish. So thanks, folks, for listening. Until next time.